Welcome to the First Player Token Podcast, a short podcast for folks who enjoy playing board games with family and friends. I'm your host, Derek Bruff. In this episode, I have another family board game recommendation, Herbaceous. A long time ago, I decided I wouldn't bother to learn the names of trees. There's just so much else to remember. I didn't have space in my head for tree names. I know what a pine tree looks like, and I can identify a magnolia, but beyond that, I'm pretty fuzzy on trees. Now, I might have extended that to all plants, but I like to cook meals for my family, and when you cook, you can't help but learn the names of some herbs and spices. And these days, I'm even better at identifying these plants, thanks to a little game called Herbaceous, a game that I think you and your kids will find, as the box says, flavorful. Herbaceous was designed by Steve Finn and published in 2017 by Pencil First Games. The game's art is by the amazing Beth Sobel, who you might remember from our last episode. She's one of the artists on Wingspan. Sobel's art makes Herbaceous one of the prettiest games we own. Players take on the role of herb collectors, growing and potting herbs like tarragon, rosemary, sage, and lavender. Sobel's illustrations of these herbs are lovely, and you can't help but want to collect them as you play this relaxing 20-minute game. Here's the basic gameplay. On your turn, you draw an herb card and decide whether to put it in your personal garden or the communal garden. Then you draw a second herb card and put it in whichever garden you didn't select for the first card. Once you've got some herbs to work with, you can also, on your turn, decide to pot herbs. You can take herbs from both your personal garden and the communal garden and place them into one of your 4 containers, each of which scores points differently. The wooden planter scores based on unique herbs, so you'll want to put different herbs in that pot, maybe a lavender and a dill and a rosemary and a sage. The small pots can receive pairs of identical herbs, so you might pot 2 saffron and 2 bays and 2 lavenders. And the large pot scores based on how many herbs of the same kind you pot there. So you might pot 4 tarragons or 5 rosemaries. Now, keep in mind that when you pot in one of your containers, you can't add to it later. So you have to decide when the right time is to actually fill that container. Once the herb cards are all drawn and everyone finishes potting, the game ends and you tally up the scores based on the container scoring rules. Since everyone can take herbs from the communal garden, the game can get a little cutthroat. Maybe you've got your eye on the 2 sage cards in the communal garden, which will go well with the 3 sage cards in your personal garden for that large pot that scores based on identical herbs. Do you take the communal sage cards now, scoring 5 identical cards in your container? Or do you wait a turn to see if you can get a 6th sage for even more points? If you wait, someone else might scoop those communal sages up for one of their containers. How far do you press your luck? And has your daughter noticed what you're planning? Because she'll cut you off if she has half a chance. There's a little more to the game, including some rare herb cards, mint, chive, and thyme, that provide bonus points if you pot them correctly. And there's the hard-to-win herb biscuit card, which you can only get if you're the first player to pot all 3 of those rare herbs. My wife Emily says that any game involving biscuits is a game worth playing. But it's the press your luck mechanic that really drives the game. The first few turns go by very fast, but as the herbs in the communal garden accumulate, players start thinking about potting, and then you're in for some tense pass or play decisions. Herbaceous plays 2 to 4 players, and comes with instructions for a solo mode that's a nice way to pass the time. 4 players can also play as teams of 2, but I haven't tried that variant. The box says the game is rated for ages 8 and up, but it's simple enough that you can play with younger players. Little players might get their feelings hurt when someone beats them to cards in the communal garden, so be aware of that. But the game plays fast enough that if you get scooped, you'll probably get a chance to scoop someone else pretty soon. And if you'd like to go easy on a younger player, you can always press your luck a little too far and let the kids scoop you. Also, Herbaceous is quick and easy to teach, with no reading required. In fact, when my daughter was 9, she taught it to her younger cousins all by herself. Herbaceous is a great family game, but you don't have to take my word on it. let's hear from the podcast's gardening correspondents for some thoughts on Herbaceous. What's the name of this game?
Herbaceous.
What's the name of this game?
Herbaceous.
Herbaceous, yes.
Herbaceous.
And what are you guys doing with the game right now?
We're sorting cards.
Yeah, and what's on all the cards?
Plants.
What kind of plants? Do you know what they are?
Lavender and there's chive.
Chive.
Rosemary.
Rosemary.
And bay.
Bay, yeah.
I just said bay.
And what's that one called?
Dill. That one.
That one's called dill. Thyme. That one's called thyme. What do you guys think about all these cards?
They're pretty.
Yeah.
I like that you get to put once you get the flowers, you get to put them in the pots that they belong in.
Yep. And these cards are just fine.
They're just fine. Okay. Is this a stressful game or a relaxing game?
It's a relaxing game.
Stressful game.
Stressful? Why do you think it's stressful?
Because people might take one of the cards that you really, really, really need.
That's true.
And and the more of these you if they take all of them, you're going to be in very bad shape.
And there's one thing I like. I like the back of the cards. They're really pretty and they make me calm down.
Yeah. I think the illustrations are very pretty and they kind of make me want to grow plants in a garden.
And I like that one muffin thing.
It's a biscuit.
I like the biscuit. It makes me hungry. I mean, I love plants. The first time I played this game, I was really confused because there was all these plants and then a biscuit. I was really, really confused.
That's right. Do you remember where we played this game?
The first time I ever played it, I played it in a tent.
That's right. Why were you in a tent?
Because we were camping in our front yard.
That's right.
I don't know what to call our front yard.
And it was a fun game to play in our tent. There you have it. Herbaceous by Pencil First Games. The art is really lovely, and as I mentioned earlier, just a little educational. Thanks to Beth Sobel's illustrations of herbs in the game, I was able to correctly identify sage, rosemary, and a few other plants when we visited the Huntsville Botanical Gardens a couple of years ago. I may not know the names of trees, but there are some herbs that I know well. I should add that Herbaceous isn't a very big game. The box is about the size of a paperback novel, not the little ones you can get at the grocery store, but the slightly larger ones you might find at Target. The smallish box is one reason I'll often take Herbaceous on family road trips. However, the publisher has announced a pocket version that's even more portable. If you're listening to this episode on or before October 19th, 2020, head over to Kickstarter where you can back Herbaceous Pocket Edition for just $15. That's a good deal on a very fun game. That's it for this episode of the First Player Token Podcast. See the show notes for a link to my website, where you can find past episodes, see photos of Herbaceous, and find me on Instagram and Twitter. And if you have a minute, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen. I've been your host, Derek Bruff. Thanks for listening. Now it's time to play some games. Herbaceous. 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 Herbaceous.